Hi, my name's Glenn Weinreb, and today we're going to talk about the tools that are needed by lawmakers to tackle climate change. And this is part 8 of our Climate Solution video series. Before we begin, we're going to review material from previous videos. First, let's review climate strategy in 75 seconds. Our society is ultimately faced with the following question. Do we want to do climate the easy way or the hard way? The easy way focuses on remedies that reduce significant amounts of carbon dioxide for relatively little money, while the hard way involves programs that are not effective or not cost effective. Unfortunately, for the most part, our society is doing climate the hard way. This is due to the selling of climate and the delegation of decarbonization. The selling of climate is when companies, universities, and governments talk about the things they are doing to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. However, their efforts are rarely quantified. More specifically, the amount of carbon dioxide reduced and the cost per ton are rarely specified. Organizations sell climate to improve their standing with the public or to sell a product or service. Also, they focus on their own interests, not society's climate interests. And the second problem is the delegation of decarbonization. This is when our society encourages individuals, companies, cities, and states to reduce carbon dioxide. However, these entities rarely have the physical ability to do this at a low cost. Okay, that's climate strategy, or lack thereof. Now let's review climate economics in 30 seconds. Each climate remedy has a decarbonization cost, which is the number of dollars spent to reduce emissions by 1 ton of carbon dioxide. For example, if one spends $300 to reduce carbon dioxide by 6 tons, then decarbonization cost works out to $50 per ton. Some climate remedies have a low decarbonization cost, whereas others have high. For example, building a solar farm has a low decarbonization cost, while placing windmills in the ocean is relatively expensive. Okay, now let's review decarbonization strategy. Many lawmakers are asking, why spend $200 to reduce emissions by 1 ton of carbon dioxide when we can do it for 20? This is another way of saying that many lawmakers want to decarbonize in lowest cost order. If one uses the fruit on tree analogy, this entails consuming the lowest hanging fruit first, followed by the layer above. In this analogy, consuming fruit refers to doing things that reduce carbon dioxide, such as building a solar farm or building a wind farm. The lowest hanging fruit is the easiest to get to, and therefore has the lowest decarbonization cost. For example, the lowest layer might be $10 per ton, while the layer above is $15 per ton. The lowest third of the climate tree is typically electrical power, since green electricity costs only a little more than carbon-based electricity. Okay, now let's review climate politics. There are roughly 3 groups of people, which we refer to as groups 1, 2, and 3. Group 1 is concerned about climate change, yet is not too concerned about decarbonization costs. Group 2 is also concerned about climate. It is only willing to support low decarbonization cost programs. And Group 3 is not too concerned about climate. Group 1 is not large enough to form a majority in the United States. Therefore, to tackle climate change in the U.S. for real, one would need support from Group 2. They are the swing voters. Okay, now let's look at how Group 1 and 2 might put together a grand climate bargain. Lawmakers sometimes agree on basic principles and then have government employees explore implementation. For example, lawmakers might agree on the following basic principle. Enact a federal law that requires transitioning to a green economy over 30 years at a constant rate, at lowest cost, in lowest cost order, with additional cost passed on to consumers. In other words, do the green line in the graph at the lowest cost. After agreeing on a basic principle, lawmakers would also need to agree on a list of things they want to know. In other words, a list of things that are calculated by government economists and placed into a decarbonization report. For example, lawmakers might want to know what is physically being done each year. How does this affect the price of natural gas? How does this affect the price of electricity? How many green jobs are gained? How many carbon jobs are lost? And for each program, the cost and the amount of carbon dioxide reduced. A decarbonization report such as this would be influenced by policy options. For example, green electricity costs less if a government office has the authority to demand right-of-way for new power wires. Also, it would cost less if a government office has the authority to amend electricity purchase agreements to make it easier for metropolitan areas to switch over to green electricity. These are examples of two policy options. However, there are many. Generating many decarbonization reports for each set of policy options would be too laborious. Therefore, we need websites that enable the user to specify basic principles and policy options, click Calculate, and see a decarbonization report. In other words, we need online climate policymaking tools. These do not exist. However, in theory, they could be developed. The hard part is creating the models that make the calculations. Fortunately, in many cases, these already exist. For example, the U.S. government has a model called NEMS. The graph shown here was generated by NEMS. This projects carbon dioxide emissions from the United States over the next 30 years, assuming U.S. policy does not change. Also, this shows what is expected to happen both with and without the Inflation Reduction Act. As one can see, little is being done in both cases. Carbon dioxide emissions from the U.S. are 1/8 of global emissions. Therefore, good climate policymaking tools are needed for all nations, not just the United States. As noted previously, models that make these calculations already exist. The missing piece is the website user interface. In other words, we might be a few computer programmers away from having the needed tools. Okay, now let's look at specific tools that are needed by lawmakers. Part of my research involves studying statements that are made by lawmakers. And based on this, I don't believe they would make major changes to their economy without a detailed decarbonization report. In other words, we need websites that create decarbonization reports after the user specifies a guiding principle and policy option. Nations typically have multiple programs that reduce carbon dioxide. And as noted previously, each program has a cost and impact. Cost is often referred to in units of dollars, and impact is often quantified by two numbers. One is the number of metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions reduced, and the other is cost per ton. Net cost to society is the sum of the additional cost of the green product, government taxes, and government subsidies. Subsidies are ultimately paid for by the public, and taxes increase the cost of goods and services throughout the economy. The public is affected by all three. Economists, scientists, and engineers can calculate the amount of carbon dioxide reduced by each program. Also, all components must be considered. For example, if a program distributes free LED light bulbs, one needs to subtract emissions from vehicles that distribute the bulbs. In other words, what matters is the net carbon dioxide decreased or increased due to the program. Each program is typically characterized by several parameters. For example, an LED light bulb distribution program might be characterized by the number of free light bulbs distributed and the percentage of bulbs that replace incandescent light bulbs. Websites are needed that quantify the cost and impact of each decarbonization program after the user specifies program size and program characteristics. A climate plan consists of multiple climate programs, and multiple programs can be summarized in a decarbonization table that shows the cost and impact of each program. For example, if there are 50 programs, a decarbonization table would consist of 50 rows and 3 columns. Also, total costs and total amount of carbon dioxide reduced would be shown at the bottom. In theory, this could be presented at a website and support multiple options specified by the user. The United States emits approximately 5 billion tons of carbon dioxide each year due to the burning of fossil fuels. And in theory, this could be reduced 1/30th each year over 30 years to hit zero in the 2050s. 1/30th of 5 billion works out to approximately 170 million tons a year. Therefore, emissions would need to decrease 170 million tons each year over 30 years to get to zero 30 years from now. This is plotted here with time on the horizontal axis and carbon dioxide emissions on the vertical axis. This is a theoretical goal for how the United States might tackle climate change. As mentioned previously, a nation might pass a law that requires transitioning to a green economy over several decades at the lowest cost. This means the total amount of carbon dioxide reduced at the bottom of the decarbonization table for each year would need to meet that requirement. Also, one could add a column to the table that shows the percent of the requirement met by each program. For example, if a requirement on power companies satisfied 90% of the requirement, then 90% would be shown in the table. The sum of these percentages would appear at the bottom, and one would want the sum to exceed 100. Also, one would want to see cost to citizens in units of dollars per person per year. An example of this is shown here. This is important since many citizens are asking, how much does it cost to fix this? According to survey, 40% of Republicans and 95% of Democrats in the United States are concerned about climate. However, the Republicans are only willing to support low cost per ton measures, and they favor states having more authority and the federal government having less. If one applies this to climate, it would translate into a federal law that requires states to reduce carbon dioxide by 1/30th each year over 30 years, or something similar. To do this, each state would need its own climate policy making tool. It is possible this is the only way to get majority support for a green economy in the United States. Lawmakers tend to trust government economists. However, they are often skeptical of outsiders. This is because it is too easy to cook up phony numbers wittingly or unwittingly. Therefore, policymaking tools would be most relevant if overseen by government economists. Such people actually exist. In the United States, they are at the Energy Information Administration, or EIA for short. They have 325 people, and they have a $125 million a year budget. The additional cost to go green is so small, consumers would barely notice, especially in the early years, and especially if done at the lowest cost. But where is this documented? It's not. And that's why online policymaking tools available to the public are so important. I believe this is the missing piece to the climate puzzle. And this is how we lift the fog of climate. For more climate solution videos, visit the link shown here. Thank you for listening.